This is Jake Funk, Super Bowl champion running back for your LA Rams, and you're listening to the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome into episode 36 of the Best Bell Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Bradley Stalder. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. Make sure to subscribe to all of the places. YouTube, click the red subscribe button, and on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, give the 5 stars. Tonight, I'll be reviewing the Carolina Panthers team projections in light of the Baker Mayfield trade. Within the last week, Baker Mayfield was traded to the Carolina Panthers in exchange for a conditional 5th-round pick with some salary dump and reduction in pay and lots. Ultimately, the Carolina Panthers have Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield on their team, along with Matt Corral, who was selected in the 3rd round of this year's draft. Good things, are they on the horizon? Not sure yet for the Carolina Panthers, but they've got to be better now without Sam Darnold as the starting quarterback. It's got to be Baker Mayfield. So I updated the projections. Sam Darnold not as the starting quarterback. Instead, now it's Baker Mayfield. But let me go through and describe some of the changes, because some people will say, is Baker Mayfield really that much better than Sam Darnold? And the answer is yes. He has a better completion percentage over his career, pretty much every season. His yards per attempt is about a yard greater per attempt. His touchdown rate is higher throughout his career, and he has lower interception rate. So yes, you're going to have better decisions being made by Baker Mayfield, and you're going to see that reflected in the projections for the Carolina Panthers. So before the Baker Mayfield trade, I had Sam Darnold projected for taking the majority of the play, taking majority of quarterback snaps. 634 pass attempts I had for Darnold, and only 381 completions, 4,147 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 20 interceptions, and 60 for 232 and 4 touchdowns on the ground. That was for Sam Darnold, playing all 17 games at about 97% of the snaps. 253 fantasy points. That would have been at best QB 15 last season in total points. So the Panthers were pass heavier than what I looked at previously with the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to be closer to a 58% pass rate instead of a 51% pass rate. So you're going to see more passing volume for the Carolina Panthers and fewer rushes. Now, I said quarterback 15 is probably the ceiling for Sam Darnold if he gets all of the volume, but it's Baker Mayfield's show. I have 10 more completions for Baker Mayfield, about 550 to 600 more yards for Baker Mayfield, 10 more passing touchdowns, 2 fewer interceptions. But here's the catch: 20 fewer rushes for almost 90 fewer rushing yards and 3 fewer rushing touchdowns. Baker Mayfield is not an option when it gets closer to the goal line. So you have to take away some of those rushing, but the increased passing, that matters for Mayfield. And so looking at my projections, 297, almost 298 fantasy points for Baker Mayfield would put him at quarterback 12 if he was the quarterback last season, playing all 17 games at about 97% of the snaps. Now, do I think that he's going to get all the snaps? I think the coaches are going to still... I don't have confidence in the Carolina Panthers coaching staff, Matt Rule and McAdoo and all the other coaches to make the right decision about their quarterbacks. These are, of course, optimistic projections. Still, Mayfield tops out at probably at best a high-end QB2, probably better fitting as a mid to back-end quarterback 2. So probably quarterback 18 to 22 is the right range where I would want to be drafting Baker Mayfield at this time. I wouldn't want to reach, though. And in many markets, he's going much later than quarterback 22. Happy with having Baker Mayfield as my quarterback 3. we've seen some spike weeks from him and willing to throw the ball down the field. And that's why I think that you're not going to see a lot of changes for Christian McCaffrey here. A few more rushes because Sam Darnold does rush a little bit more than Baker. So giving those back to the running backs. Christian McCaffrey, I projected for 6 more rush attempts with Baker Mayfield in. So my projection with Baker and the new projection for the Panthers, Christian McCaffrey, 260 rushes, just under 1,200 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns on the ground, 97 receptions, 124 targets, 665 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, about 324 fantasy points in half PPR. That would have been running back 2 last season, only behind Jonathan Taylor. And so if you want to draft Christian McCaffrey first overall, go for it. If you want to draft Christian McCaffrey second overall, go for it. But I think it's a clear tier break from Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor to after those players. Austin Eckler, I think, would struggle to get to where Christian McCaffrey is level, his elite axis of ceiling. There are just so many weapons on the Los Angeles Chargers that you throw it to Mike Williams in the red zone. You throw it to Keenan Allen in the end zone. You've got now a younger, better player than Jared Cook. You've got now Gerald Everett. You've got an ascending player in Josh Palmer. So yes, I think that the Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor tier is still intact. And if anything, I think you can draft Christian McCaffrey with just a tad more confidence with Baker Mayfield than when Sam Darnold was quarterback, not just because of the passing capability, but also the ability for a quarterback like Baker Mayfield to sustain drives. And more drives there are, the bigger the volume, the more scoring opportunities for Christian McCaffrey. I have him for 2 more total touchdowns with this Baker Mayfield projection. So over the course of the season, assuming Christian McCaffrey plays all 17 games, and whether or not Christian McCaffrey is injury prone, that's not the purpose of this podcast. And that's not what I want to dive into. I would disagree with players if they'd say that Christian McCaffrey himself is injury prone, but you can refer to Dr. Edwin from a couple weeks ago when he came on the podcast. So I would ask that you listen to that episode. Let me see if I can find it. I would ask that you listen to episode 29 of the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast, where Dr. Edwin Porras comes on and talks about Christian McCaffrey in particular, but how if you don't like Christian McCaffrey, you just don't like running backs, and that's fair enough. Let's move on to DJ Moore, because there's been hype about DJ Moore. What can DJ Moore do? I had DJ Moore projected for about 205 half PPR points before the Baker Mayfield trade. But now, and that would have been wide receiver 12 last season. But now, DJ Moore, I have projected for 108 receptions, 186 targets, 1,300 yards, 5 touchdowns. That would be a career high, 5 touchdowns, 231 half PPR points. That would have been wide receiver 8 in total points last season, just behind Stephon Diggs. So there is optimism because of DJ Moore's prolific target share. Last year, he had 28.5% target share. So yes, you want to be getting your DJ Moore. He's going to be in that low-end wide receiver 1 conversation. And if he swings the right way with touchdown variance, we could be looking at first round 2023 DJ Moore in fantasy drafts in next year. So that's a possibility. Maybe draft or buy your DJ Moore at discounts at this point. It's within the range of outcomes that he ascends this year. Now, before the Baker Mayfield trade, I was pretty pessimistic about Robby Anderson. Before the trade, I had Robby Anderson for 73 catches, 787 yards, and 4 touchdowns, only 141 fantasy points. Now I have Robby Anderson for 882 yards, over 6 passing touchdowns, 163 half PPR fantasy points. That would have been about wide receiver 29 last season. So I think that Robby Anderson gets himself back into that mid wide receiver 3 range for you, given Baker's increased accuracy, his increased yards per attempt, and his increased touchdown rate. We're going to see things go better for Robby Anderson this year. He started to tail off, but still had an 18-19% target share in 2021. And with improved quarterback play, Robby Anderson is a better bet to smash, and he's going much later. His ADP, in fact, on Drafters Fantasy, and I know that that's full PPR, but Robby Anderson right now is going at the 171st spot overall, which is pretty darn stinking late. That is in the 15th round. 15th round, Robby Anderson. And he has the potential to be a mid wide receiver 3 for you. Yes, I think that there is optimism for Robby Anderson. Aside from Robby Anderson, DJ Moore, and Christian McCaffrey, the only other player I have projected for 100 half PPR points or more is actually Rashard Higgins, for a couple reasons. One is Higgins was like a 10% target share player last year on Cleveland and a 5% touchdown rate. He played pretty well in 2020. His fantasy points per target were very high, among the highest in the league. But it's the connection with Baker Mayfield and the lack of proven players behind DJ Moore and Robby Anderson that give me a little more optimism that if you're taking like a 20th round shot, just include Rashard Higgins in your rotation of players you're selecting at the end of drafts. Rashard Higgins has that connection. There's weak competition, and he's played well in the past. In 2020, Rashard Higgins had 37 receptions, 52 targets, 599 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns on only a 60% snap share, and his fantasy points per target were 7th among all wide receivers, only behind David Moore, who is the number 1 wide receiver in that category, Will Fuller at number 2, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Adam Thielen, A.J. Brown. Aside from David Moore, everyone else is a stud. And looking after Rashard Higgins, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Nelson Aguilar on a Vegas Raiders team that used him pretty well. So I think that there is at least an eyebrow raise with Rashard Higgins, an 18%, 14% share when he was with the Browns in 2020. And I think that if I'm putting a bet on who's going to be the wide receiver 3 for Carolina, it's going to be Rashard Higgins. That's my bet. The tight end position, we don't talk about it. It's like Bruno. Yeah, Ian Thomas, Tommy Tremble, they're nothing in the passing game. So I would not be targeting either of them, even as a last round pick in best ball, or they can stay on your waiver wire. Baker Mayfield should be a consideration later in your one quarterback drafts. He should not be, or you can leave him on your waiver wire if you want, but in super flex drafts, he needs to be drafted for sure as a quarterback too. Christian McCaffrey is in that elite tier with Jonathan Taylor. DJ Moore is considered a wide receiver 1 for me. Robby Anderson, you can see wide receiver 3 potential with Baker Mayfield there. And if you're taking a late round dart on a wide receiver, you want to stack with Baker, or you want just someone who's part of your rotation of wide receivers, Rashard Higgins, I think, will beat out the Shi Smith, Steven Sullivans, Terrace Marshalls, Brandon Zylstra's, Andre Roberts of the world. That's ultimately my eval on the Carolina Panthers situation. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate you checking out the podcast. If you like what you heard, give 5 stars on the Apple Podcasts and on iHeartRadio and Spotify. Hit the subscribe button on the YouTube, the red button. Check out the Best Bell Fantasy website, where I will be posting these projections here shortly on the website once I figure out how to get the HTML just right to post on the site. So keep your eyes peeled for that. In the meantime, good luck in best ball streets.